Sometimes a game show becomes something sacred, sometimes laughter turns to tears, and sometimes a 75-year-old man's final wish teaches an entire television studio what love really looks like. This is the story of the day Steve Harvey stopped being a host and became something much more profound, a man who understood that some promises are bigger than television, bigger than rules, bigger than everything except the love between a grandfather and his family. It was Thursday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Los Angeles. The autumn sun streamed through the high windows, casting golden light across the polished stage floor. Steve Harvey stood at his podium in a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, his energy infectious as always, working the crowd with his signature blend of humor and warmth that had made him America's most beloved game show host. Two families faced off under the bright studio lights, the Morrison family from Denver and the Rodriguez family from San Antonio. The energy was exactly what you'd expect from Family Feud: competitive, fun, and filled with the kind of laughter that made great television. But it was the Rodriguez family that caught everyone's attention from the moment they walked onto the stage. Not because they were particularly loud or animated, but because of the obvious love that radiated between them. Three generations stood at that podium, representing a family bond that was immediately visible to everyone in the studio. At the center of it all was 75-year-old Eduardo Rodriguez, the family patriarch. Despite his age, Eduardo carried himself with a dignity and strength that commanded respect. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his white mustache meticulously groomed, and he wore a brown suit that had clearly been his best for many years. His weathered hands, marked by decades of honest work, gripped the podium with quiet determination. Eduardo had driven 12 hours from San Antonio with his family despite his doctor's recent warnings about his heart condition. His daughter Carmen, 45, a teacher who had inherited her father's gentle strengths, stood beside him with her twin teenage sons, Miguel and Carlos, both honor students and star soccer players at their high school. During the family introductions, Eduardo had charmed everyone in the studio with his old-world courtesy and surprisingly quick wit. When Steve asked him what he did for a living, Eduardo had straightened his shoulders with pride. "I worked construction for 50 years, Mr. Harvey," he said in accented but clear English. "Built houses, built schools, built churches. But my greatest construction project was this family." He gestured to his daughter and grandsons with a smile that could have powered the studio lights. The audience had erupted in appreciation, and Steve had grinned that warm grin that had endeared him to millions. "Now that's what I'm talking about. Mr. Rodriguez, you built something beautiful here." But what the studio audience didn't know was the real reason the Rodriguez family had made this journey. 6 months earlier, Eduardo had been diagnosed with severe heart disease. The doctors had been blunt, his time was limited, perhaps a year, maybe less. When the call came that they'd been selected for Family Feud, Eduardo's family had initially said no. How could they leave him for a television show when every moment was precious? But Eduardo had insisted. "This has been my dream," he told them in Spanish, his voice firm beside his weakening heart. "To see my family win something together, to show the world what we built. We go, we play, we win." The game progressed beautifully for the first 4 rounds. Eduardo was sharp, his answers clever and often surprising. When Steve asked for something you might find in a garage, Eduardo had confidently answered, "Dreams," explaining that his garage was where he kept his old tools and photo albums, all the things that represented his life's work. The audience loved him. Steve loved him. The Rodriguez family was building a commanding lead, and Eduardo was in his element, clearly living his dream of being on national television with the family he adored. But during the 5th round, something shifted. Steve had just asked the question, "Name something that gets better with age." Eduardo stepped up to the podium, that familiar determined look in his eyes, but as he opened his mouth to answer, his face suddenly went pale. His weathered hand moved to his chest, and for just a moment, his knees seemed to buck. Carmen noticed immediately. "Papa?" she whispered, reaching out to steady him. Eduardo waved her off with a slight smile, straightening himself with visible effort. "Wine," he said clearly into the microphone, though his voice carried a slight tremor that hadn't been there before. "Wine," Steve announced enthusiastically. "Survey says..." The board revealed it was the number 2 answer. The Rodriguez family celebrated, but Carmen kept her eyes on her father. She could see what the cameras couldn't catch: the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way he was gripping the podium just a little too tightly. The game continued, but Eduardo's answers became shorter, more labored. During the commercial break, Carmen approached him with concern. "Papa, we should stop. You don't look good." Eduardo shook his head firmly. "No, Mija. We finish. We win. For the family. Steve, who had been watching this exchange from across the stage, walked over. Everything okay here, Mr. Rodriguez? Eduardo looked up at Steve with eyes that were still sharp despite his obvious physical discomfort. I'm fine, Mr. Harvey. Just want to finish what we started. But Steve had been around long enough to recognize when someone was pushing through pain. Sir, if you need to sit down, take a break, we can— No, Eduardo interrupted, his voice gaining strength. My family came here to win. We finished the game. The determination in the old man's voice was absolute, and Steve found himself nodding with respect. All right, Mr. Rodriguez, let's win this thing. They resumed the game, but during the next question, the unthinkable happened. Steve had just asked, name something you'd want your children to remember about you. Eduardo stepped up to the podium, and this time the pain was unmistakable. His face contorted, his hand clutched his chest, and he stumbled backward. Carmen caught him just as his knees gave way completely. Papa! She screamed. The studio fell into chaos. Audience members gasped and stood up. The production team rushed onto the stage. Steve immediately called for medical assistance while helping to support Eduardo, who was conscious but clearly in severe distress. My chest, Eduardo whispered, his breathing labored. Can't breathe? Within minutes, paramedics arrived with a stretcher and emergency equipment. They quickly assessed Eduardo's condition. He was having a heart attack, and they needed to get him to the hospital immediately. As they prepared to load him onto the stretcher, Eduardo grabbed Carmen's hand with surprising strength. Do we win? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. Papa, don't worry about the game, just focus on getting better. But Eduardo's eyes found Steve, who was standing nearby, watching the scene with obvious concern and heartbreak. Mr. Harvey, Eduardo called weakly. The last question. I want to answer the last question. Steve approached the stretcher, kneeling down beside it. Mr. Rodriguez, the paramedics need to get you to the hospital. The game doesn't matter right now. Eduardo's eyes, despite his pain, held a fierce determination. It matters to me. Something you'd want your children to remember about you. I have the answer. The paramedics were getting restless, knowing that every second counted. But something in Eduardo's voice, the absolute certainty of a dying man's final wish, made everyone pause. Steve looked at the paramedics, then at the production team, then back at Eduardo. In that moment, he made a decision that defied every protocol, every rule, every consideration except the human heart. Give us 1 minute, Steve told the paramedics. What happened next had never occurred in the history of television. Steve Harvey took his microphone and knelt beside the stretcher in the middle of the Family Feud stage. The cameras, which had been rolling throughout the emergency, captured every moment as Steve became something more than a game show host. He became a minister, a friend, a man helping another man find peace in his final moments. Mr. Rodriguez, Steve said gently, what's your answer to something you'd want your children to remember about you? Eduardo looked up at his daughter and grandsons who had gathered around the stretcher, tears streaming down their faces. His voice, though weak, carried absolute clarity. That I loved them more than my own life, that I worked every day, build something beautiful for them to stand on. The studio was completely silent except for the sound of crying, not just from the Rodriguez family, but from the audience, the crew, even the hardened production assistants who had seen hundreds of shows. Steve's own voice was thick with emotion as he announced, "Survey says," he paused, looking directly into Eduardo's eyes. "That's the #1 answer, Mr. Rodriguez. Your family wins." The relief that washed over Eduardo's face was transformative. Despite his pain, despite his struggle to breathe, he filed the most beautiful smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. "We won," he whispered to Carmen. "We won together." But Steve wasn't finished. As the paramedics prepared to move Eduardo to the ambulance, Steve made another unprecedented decision. "I'm coming with you," he announced. The production team looked at him in shock. They were in the middle of taping. There were schedules, contracts, obligation. Steve looked at them with an expression that brooked no argument. This man just gave us the most important moment in this show's history. I'm not leaving him now. And so, in what would become legend in television history, Steve Harvey climbed into the ambulance with the Rodriguez family, still wearing his game show suit, still holding his microphone. The ride to the hospital was unlike anything that had ever been broadcast. The cameras, at Steve's insistence, continued rolling as he sat beside Eduardo in the ambulance, holding the old man's hand while paramedics worked to stabilize his condition. "Mr. Rodriguez," Steve said softly as the ambulance raced through Los Angeles traffic, "tell me about your construction work. What was your favorite thing you ever built?" Eduardo's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Steve with effort. "A little church in East San Antonio, took me 2 years, working weekends. When it was finished, and I saw families praying there, I knew I had built something that would outlast me. Steve squeezed his hand gently. You built something else that's gonna outlast you, sir. You built this family. You built this love. That's construction work that lasts forever. By the time they reached the hospital, Eduardo was stable but weak. As they wheeled him into the emergency room, he caught Steve's hand one more time. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for letting me finish. Steve knelt beside the hospital gurney, no longer caring about his expensive suit or the cameras or anything except this moment. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez, for reminding me what this show is really about. It's not about the money or the prizes. It's about family. It's about love. It's about finishing what we started together. Eduardo Rodriguez passed away peacefully 3 hours later, surrounded by his family in the hospital room. His last words, according to Carmen, were, "We won. We won together." The episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to remove the emergency or Steve's unprecedented decision to leave the studio. The network initially worried about the ratings' impact of showing such raw, unscripted emotion. They needn't have worried. It became the highest-rated episode in Family Feud history. More than that, it changed television. The final moments, with Steve holding Eduardo's hand in the ambulance, while the old man talked about building churches and families, became one of the most replayed clips in internet history. The $20,000 that the Rodriguez family won was donated by Steve's production company to a scholarship fund in Eduardo's name, specifically for students pursuing careers in construction and education, the two things Eduardo valued most, but perhaps the most profound impact was on Steve Harvey himself. In interviews afterward, he said that Eduardo Rodriguez taught him something that changed how he approached every show, every contestant, every moment he spent in front of those cameras. I learned that my job isn't to host a game show, Steve said. My job is to honor the people who trust me with their stories, their dreams, their final wishes. Eduardo showed me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be present when someone needs you to witness their love. The suit Steve wore that day, now rumpled and stained from the hospital visit, was never cleaned. He had it framed in his office, along with a photo of Eduardo and his family celebrating their victory. Underneath, a simple plaque reads, "Some things are more important than television." And Carmen Rodriguez, who still watches that episode every year on the anniversary of her father's death, says it perfectly captured who Eduardo was. He finished what he started. He loved his family more than his own life, and he built something beautiful for us to stand on. The legacy of Eduardo Rodriguez extends far beyond that single episode. Family Feud instituted a policy that if any contestant has a medical emergency, the show stops completely to take care of them. They call it the Eduardo Protocol, and it's become a model for how television production can prioritize humanity over schedule. Every year on the anniversary of that episode, Steve Harvey receives a card from the Rodriguez family. Inside it always says the same thing: "Thank you for letting Papa finish the game." And every year, Steve responds with the same message: "Thank you for reminding me why we play." Because sometimes, a game show becomes something sacred. Sometimes, love is more important than entertainment, and sometimes, a 75-year-old man's final wish teaches everyone watching what it truly means to build something beautiful, not with tools and concrete, but with dedication, sacrifice, and love that lasts forever. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after that unforgettable episode aired, something extraordinary happened that would cement Eduardo's legacy even further. Carmen Rodriguez had been struggling since her father's death. The grief was overwhelming, but it was more than that. She felt lost without his guidance, his strength, his unwavering belief in the family he'd built. The twins, Miguel and Carlos, were having their own difficulties processing the loss of the grandfather who had been their hero, their role model, their constant source of encouragement. It was Carmen who first noticed the letters arriving at their small house in San Antonio. 1, then 5, then dozens, then hundreds. Letters from viewers who had watched Eduardo's final episode, people from across the country who had been moved by his story, his courage, his final answer about love being more important than life itself. The letters came from construction workers who said Eduardo reminded them why they took pride in their work. Teachers who said his words about building something beautiful for future generations had re-inspired their calling. Grandparents who said they now understood the importance of expressing their love while they still could. But it was one letter in particular that changed everything. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a return address from Harvey Productions in Los Angeles. Carmen opened it with trembling hands. expecting perhaps a formal condolence or maybe some paperwork related to the episode. Instead, she found a personal letter from Steve Harvey, handwritten on his personal stationery. "Dear Carmen and the Rodriguez family," it began. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about your father since that day in the studio. Eduardo taught me something about courage, about love, about what it means to finish what you start. But more than that, he showed me what true legacy looks like. I want to do something in his honor, something I think he would approve of." The letter went on to explain that Steve had established the Eduardo Rodriguez Foundation, dedicated to supporting young people from working families who wanted to pursue careers in construction, education, or any field where they could, as Eduardo had put it, build something beautiful for others to stand on. But that wasn't all. Steve had also arranged for something that would have made Eduardo incredibly proud. 2 weeks later, Carmen received a phone call that left her speechless. It was the principal of Miguel and Carlos's high school asking if the family would accept a special honor. The school district, in partnership with Steve Harvey's foundation, wanted to name their new vocational training center after Eduardo Rodriguez. The dedication ceremony took place on a bright Saturday morning in December, exactly 6 months after Eduardo's passing. The entire Rodriguez family was there, along with hundreds of community members who had known and loved Eduardo, but the guest of honor was Steve Harvey, who had flown in specifically for the ceremony. Standing before the crowd, Steve shared stories about Eduardo that the television audience had never heard. How during the commercial breaks, Eduardo had talked about each of his construction projects as if they were his children. How he'd shown Steve pictures of every house he'd built, every school he'd helped construct, every church where families still gathered to worship. Eduardo Rodriguez understood something that too many of us forget, Steve told the assembled crowd. He understood that we're all builders. Some of us build with hammers and nails. Some of us build with words and ideas. Some of us build with love and sacrifice. But we're all construction workers in the great project of making life better for the people who come after us. The vocational training center that now bears Eduardo's name teaches young people carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, and masonry. But above the entrance, inscribed in bronze letters, are Eduardo's final words from that Family Feud episode. "I worked every day to build something beautiful for them to stand on." Every student who graduates from the Eduardo Rodriguez Vocational Training Center receives a small bronze medallion with those words engraved on it. It's become a symbol throughout the San Antonio community of the kind of work ethic, dedication, and love that Eduardo embodied. But perhaps the most touching part of Eduardo's legacy is what happened to Miguel and Carlos, the twin grandsons who had watched their grandfather's final moments on national television. Miguel, inspired by his grandfather's example, decided to pursue civil engineering with a focus on affordable housing. He wanted to design homes for working families, the kind of people his grandfather had spent his life serving. Carlos chose education, planning to become a shop teacher so he could pass on the hands-on skills and work ethic that Eduardo had demonstrated every day of his life. Both boys applied for and received full scholarships from the Eduardo Rodriguez Foundation, scholarships that Steve Harvey personally presented to them in a ceremony at their high school graduation. "Your grandfather built more than buildings," Steve told them that day. "He built men, and now you're going to build the future." The impact of Eduardo's story continued to ripple outward in ways that no one could have predicted. Construction companies across Texas began incorporating Eduardo moments into their training programs, times when workers would stop and reflect on the greater purpose of their work, the families who would live in the homes they built, the communities that would gather in the buildings they constructed. Teachers began using Eduardo's story in their classrooms, not just as an example of immigrant success, but as a demonstration of how any honest work can be a form of love when it's done with the right intention. Family counselors started referencing Eduardo's final answer when working with families struggling to communicate their love for each other. "What would you want your children to remember about you?" became a powerful question that helped parents focus on what really mattered. Steve Harvey, for his part, never forgot the lesson Eduardo taught him about finishing what you start. In subsequent shows, when contestants faced difficult moments or personal struggles, Steve would remember the old man who insisted on answering one final question, even while having a heart attack. The episode itself became required viewing in several university programs that studied media ethics and human compassion. Journalism schools used it as an example of how media can serve humanity rather than just entertainment. Medical schools incorporated it into discussions about patient dignity and end-of-life care. And in the Family Feud studios in Los Angeles, there's now a small memorial in the green room. It's a simple wooden plaque made from reclaimed construction materials, with Eduardo's picture and his final survey answer. Every contestant who appears on the show is told Eduardo's story, reminded that they're participating in something that can be bigger than a game, bigger than prizes, bigger than television itself. Carmen Rodriguez, now a grandmother herself, often visits the vocational training center that bears her father's name. She watches young people learning the trades that Eduardo practiced for 50 years, and she sees something that makes her smile through her continuing grief. They work with the same pride her father had, the same attention to detail, the same understanding that what they're building matters. They've absorbed not just the technical skills, but the philosophy behind them, that every project, no matter how small, is an opportunity to build something beautiful for others to stand on. The suit that Steve Harvey wore that day, the one he had framed in his office, now hangs in the Eduardo Rodriguez Memorial Room at the training center. Students often pause to read the plaque beneath it, to understand the story of the day when entertainment became something sacred, when a game show became a final testimony to the power of love. And every year, on the anniversary of Eduardo's death, the Rodriguez family gathers to watch the episode together, not as a source of sadness, but as a celebration of a man who lived fully, loved completely, and finished what he started. Miguel, now in his final year of engineering school, always says the same thing when the episode ends: Abuelo got his wish. He showed the world what we're made of. Carlos, studying education and working part-time at the training center, adds, and he's still building. Every student who walks through these doors, every house Miguel designs, every family that remembers his story, that's all part of what Abuelo built. Because Eduardo Rodriguez was right. Love is something you want your children to remember about you. But more than that, it's something that keeps building, keeps growing, keeps creating beauty long after the builder is gone. The game ended that day in the studio, but Eduardo's construction project, the project of love, of family, of building something beautiful for others to stand on, continues in classrooms and construction sites, in scholarship programs and family conversations, in the hearts of everyone who learned what it looks like when someone finishes what they started with: courage, dignity, and an unshakable belief in the beauty they were creating. That's the real legacy of Eduardo Rodriguez. Not just that he won a game show, but that he showed the world what winning really means.